Digital 410 Productions proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Dodd Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. And hope everybody had a nice, warm, semi-safe weekend. We'll get into a little bit later. I went up to Georgia this weekend for a tactical event and World War II reenactment. We all kind of hauled ass home on Saturday because they were calling for not only cold weather, but high winds and insanity. And well, as most reenactors have so much garbage, they got loaded up in the back of their trucks. Most of us don't want to drive home in pouring down rain. I made it home by 1:30 in the morning. And by 8 o'clock in the morning the next day here in Florida, we had a tornado right across the river. And so I must have ran against that storm to get home. And it caught up with us in the morning. And so for the people who are in Fort Myers, Florida, who were affected by that tornado, our thoughts and prayers with all you with your property damage. I don't think there was any lives lost, but there was definitely a lot of property damage. I was over there. But Jeff, Henry, how are you guys doing?
Doing well, doing really well. Pretty cold here in central Alabama.
It's cold everywhere. I got 2 shirts on and I'm in Florida.
I was going to say, I would tell you what the weather is in Texas, but it might change before the words come out of my mouth. We're going from 77 to 39 to 66 the next day. It's about as bipolar as it gets here.
It got down to 37 in Georgia. Luckily, I didn't have to sleep in my tent. A bed opened up in one of the Boy Scout dorms, and so I snugged in there in a nice bed, so I didn't have to sleep in my cold tent. But let's not leave our guest waiting in the winds, because he's on the phone with us, and he's ready to participate in the conversation. So, Jeff, if you don't mind.
Yeah, very excited to have him on today. He is... he garners a lot of respect wherever he goes. He's a retired Houston police officer, so that just goes without saying right there, the kind of man that he is and what he's done for us and the people, that live in the Houston area. And he's a very devout Christian man, and he's an incredible human being. He is the General Patton reenactor, and don't let anybody tell you any different. He is Patton Hidden in Plain Sight, which is the name of his 6-book series, Patton Hidden in Plain Sight. There are 6 books that he has published about Patton. He knows more about Patton than Patton probably knew about himself. Mr. Denny Hare. Denny, can you hear us?
I can, and thank you for that. Such a nice thing to say about me. I appreciate it. Probably
absolutely. I wrote it all down, mostly lies,
Well, it was an honor to be a police officer in Houston. So when you can protect and serve folks that really need the help. We don't give our police officers enough credit worldwide. Amen. And certainly in America. So, but we're talking about General Patton tonight, and I'll talk about police work at another time. I've written a set of books. There's 6 volumes, works out to about 1,700 pages and about 500 photographs. And it takes Patton's entire Third Army from the time that he found out that he was going to actually get the command after the slapping incident all the way through to the end of the war. His entire diary, day by day, is in there. What the men did, how they operated in the field. It has it starts at Patton's day in the morning and from the war room and presentations all the way through each day. I mean, each day of the war. It starts about just prior to the beginning of 1944, 1943, when he was still in Sicily, and goes all the way through to the end of the war. I quit on July the 7th, 1945. So I was inspired by the movie, and I thought, well, did such a man really exist as the movie portrayed him? And as I began to read about him and study him, I realized that the movie left a lot out. And then I realized why. The Patton family, after Patton's death, they were very hesitant to have anything published because his son was going to be a career Army officer who made it to Major General, and both his daughter's kids grew up to be 4-star generals, respectively. And had they printed what I was able to find out, what Patton had really said in his diary and things like that, they would have probably caught a great deal of flack from the higher upper echelon in the military at the time, and General Eisenhower and things, because there was a love-hate relationship between Patton and Eisenhower and Bradley and some of the others. And so what I decided to do was to write a book exactly as it occurred. But I didn't want my opinion in it. I wanted their opinion in it. So there's very little of Denny saying they said this or this has happened or that happened. It's what they said happened. And I think when history is written, that's the way it should be. You don't need somebody else's opinion telling you what to think. You need to be able to read it and figure it for yourself. So that's how these books were written. It took 10 years to write them.
Well, that's a very accurate statement there. I think a lot of authors sometimes lose track of that, and to keep it to the true story, because, as us as historians, we found out that you don't have to make anything up. History is incredible in itself. We don't have to embellish it. We don't have to add anything to it. If we tell it in its purest sense, it's as entertaining as could ever be written. And that's one of the fascinating things about your series. I bought these books from you a few years ago, and I admitted to you on the phone yesterday, I haven't read them, but I've looked through them. I've used them for referencing, all 6 of them, multiple times. And I want the listeners to hear that again, that it's about 1,700 pages and it's about 500 photographs. This is not Patton's career in the military. This is not Patton's biography. This is just 18 months of his time in the service.
Pretty much. That's about right.
That's incredible. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Well, I tell you, one of the things I began to go to publishers, several publishers were interested, and they said, well, that's a lot of information. Can you cut it down to, say, 230 pages? And I said, no, I'm going to tell it like it was, because Patton died before he could tell it like it was, and someone needs to. So it's written as Patton hidden in plain sight, because most all of this information was available, but it's never been put in chronological order. When you put it in chronological order, you get an entirely different story than history has painted about him. And he was a man that was, of course, an authoritarian, but he was also a loving man, and he loved his soldiers. He would, let me give you an example that happened while he was stationed around the U.S. He was a man of means. He and his wife had inherited money. He never took any money from the military the entire time. All he wanted to do was be a good soldier. But he had people under his command from time to time that were destitute. And he would make arrangements for his dog to get lost. And then he would make arrangements for that person who was destitute to make sure they found it, and he would give a reward. That way they wouldn't think it was charity. That's the kind of man he was. People see the movie and they think he's a swashbuckler guy that just cusses all the time. That was part of him, but he was much deeper than that. And he was like, if you wanted to follow somebody into battle, he would be the person you want to follow, because you had the best chance of coming out of it. And he was a fair man, and he was much misunderstood man. And the people that, when anybody is as open as he was and as knowledgeable as he was and in the press as he was, he's also going to gain some enemies. And he was senior general. He trained most of the other generals at one time or another that served under him. And when you start to look at the bigger picture in Europe, you see that the U.S. Army was divided in army groups, and each group had 3 armies in it, and on average, and each army group had 3 corps, and each corps had 3 divisions. Now, this was fluid. They went up and down in size, and the Battle of the Bulge changed a lot of the table of organization. So that has never been done before. So these generals were learning how to do things that had never been done before. And when you have millions of people in uniform and you have to go into different places and you have to travel with that much equipment, just the idea of moving an armored division into an area, you had to have a person who knew how wide this flop was going to be and whether they could put the armored division in that area or whether it would swamp down into a river or could it get where it was going. So the logistics of that, and Pat knew it all. Pat studied the maps, and he told Colonel Koch, who was his G2, he says, he did this in England. He says, I know where I want to go and I know how I want to get there, because he'd studied all the maps and he knew where the different armies had gone during the different campaigns and the Crusades, all the way back to the Byzantine period and even the Egyptians. He says, this would be the best way to travel. We can make it this way if we can get that way. And so they plotted in England where he thought they would go. The movie says that, he shows up with Bradley and he flew in and he had to get back in the war. And he said, well, I got this plan. It's called Operation Cobra. Well, that's not true. The Operation Cobra was set up in England. They knew as soon as they could get a breakout, the Third Army would be turned loose. He had planned for it. He said, well, if they do this, I'm going to do that. If they do this other, I'm going to do that. It's like a chess game. And he said, I know what I'm going to do, and the Germans have no idea what I'm going to do. And he did it. Now, I'll give you an idea of history that we've lost. When he was turned loose on April the 1st, he was actually in command on the 28th of July, but on August the 1st, he was turned loose. In a week, he attacked in 3 different directions with 3 corps. He completely made sure that his flanks were covered by aircraft, and he actually cleared all the enemy behind him, made a big swerve and a cut, and like a pincer movement with an army, and he was ready to head toward Paris and then later to Berlin in a week. There's no other general we had that was capable of that. He was moving so fast and so quick that they had discussions in Eisenhower command at Schaeff and with Bradley says, we need to slow this down a little bit because they couldn't keep up. Now, that's the kind of generalship you saw in the first week in Third Army from the 7th, from the 1st of August to about the 7th and 8th of August. It's amazing, but people forget and they didn't know. He cleared the area all the way to Paris quickly, and they decided ahead of time that the French decided they wanted Paris, and they went in and took it, but it was surrounded by Third Army. He went on, and he never got credit for that, although the French knew exactly which army surrounded Paris and allowed for it to fall and back into the French hands. Patton was under a blackout at the time, so there was no news of him. He actually landed in Europe on the 7th of July, and his army began to come across, and he built his army in a apple orchard there in France. And when I say built his army, you have to understand that his army command, his headquarters, was there in his apple orchard. And as the divisions became operational and came in from England, they were staged. And so when he was ready to be cut loose, they had plans in place, and there they went. So he went from that. He ended up where there was something called the Falsay Pocket, which was a town, and he wanted to close the gap, because if he could close that gap, he could trap several 100,000 Germans and possibly help the war end sooner. Now, one of the things I found out while I was writing this book, his nephew, Frederick Eyre, was under Eisenhower's command. And I said, well, what did Frederick Eyre do? Well, he was the bureau chief for the FBI for counterintelligence for Schaeff. And he always believed that his uncle, he called Uncle Georgie, could have actually made it into Germany in 1944. Well, that was a pretty big, bold thing that someone might say, because we know it didn't happen. So he caught General Bradley after the war in an odd moment, and he said, sir, could my uncle have made it into Germany in 1944? And Bradley, in this moment, I guess he wasn't thinking. He said, well, your uncle was he could have exaggerated a lot, but in this particular incident, yes, I believe he could have. Now that's got to shatter most people.
It's interesting when you talk about the movie a little bit and what it did well, and probably some things that you disagree with, or probably, for the sake of, I guess, a movie's a movie, and it can't always be 100% accurate. But Henry and I were talking just before you came on. We came on the air there, and there's some to me, some of the best things about that movie is, and like it is with Patton, you get a history lesson learning from Patton. I mean, I remember one of my favorite scenes is when they've got everybody. He wanted the best wine and all the dinner there, and he had all the British guys there. And Patton wanted to sell his plan to take Sicily because, and he quotes the Athenian admiral Alcibiades from the Sicilian campaign in 415 BC when the Athenians attacked the Spartan ally, then the Sicilians, and he said, Syracuse is the key to Sicily. It's the jugular, and a lot of people probably say, "Who the heck is Alcibiades? What does that have to do?" And that's some of the things you get out of learning about Patton. I did read his War as I Knew It book, and I have to say it's not what I thought it was going to be. And I guess his wife Beatrice was the one that got it into print, and I think she kind of obviously had to finish it. But I don't want to take the spotlight off of your books talking about that one. And I know Don's got some things he wants to ask you too, I'm sure from reenacting standpoint. Don, did you have something for him?
Well, one of the things I wanted to point out, I thought it was interesting that one of the things that got him into his research on Patton was the fact that the movie left a lot of things out. Obviously, we've discussed this many times with different movies. The reason for being that is there's always time restraints, but then when he goes to track down a publisher, and we've talked about this with Henry, you run into the same thing. The publisher's like, okay, we are interested in a book, but we want X amount of pages. And so in this particular case, now he's stuck in the same position because chances are if he would have agreed on X amount of pages after he cut out all the new development stuff that he located and put out the book within the threshold that they wanted, it would probably have been the same boiled down information that the movie had, which would have then negated his whole purpose of putting out the book to begin with.
That's how I felt about it. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to do it my way. Just like Patton would have done, he did his way. I have a very rare copy of the original after-action report that Third Army published at the end of the war. It's 2 volumes. It weighs about 50 pounds.
Wow.
And it has all the G1 to G5, and it has the secret stuff in there. And it is the most best written after-action report that's ever been done. And it was secret and kept secret until about 1984, 85, when they finally got around to declassifying it. The men in his command could get it, and there was only 189 copies ever made. And so when I began to go through that voluminous volume worth of stuff, it became very obvious to me that history really owes this man a whole lot. And it's important that what he did and what his troops did, he gave credit to his troops, not himself. He says, I'm just the coat hanger that they hang Third Army on. You're Third Army. He's was a brilliant man. And there's something else found out. He had a photographic memory. So when he read all the books that he had written, he had read, and he had a voluminous library. He collected maps. So he knew where all the battlefields were from antiquity. He knew who fought where, and he had this memory. So when he went into some place, he had a lot of fun with people. He would say, and it's brought out a little bit in the movie. He said, where he says, well, the Carthaginians fought here, and I wrote this poem about it. And Bradley was kind of looking at him kind of funny and says, well, how do you know all that? I said, well, I was there. Well, he knew he wasn't there, but he knew the battle, and he knew all the people who fought in it. And he might as well have been there because he could tell the whole story. And it was a study of the many, many battlefields and what they did that gave him that extra edge that he needed to second guess where he was going and beat them at their own game. So as far as you mentioned Sicily, General Alexander was in charge of the ground forces on Sicily. He knew exactly what Patton was doing. He knew exactly where he was going. He knew exactly why he was going there. So this business of race around and beat Monty to Messina, that was Patton wanted to be there before Montgomery could be there, but there was no parade and there was no band. And the reason he did that was to cover so that they wouldn't be hit on their left flank as they were going up the side. You had Montgomery, you had Bradley, and then you had Patton's forces. And You certainly wouldn't want to be hit from your flank. The biggest mistake at Sicily was not finishing it, because they didn't cut it off, and most of the German troops that were trying to get out got out and went into the boot of Italy and had to be fought later. So that Sicily wasn't as what they wanted it, but it showed something with 7th Army, which Patton was commanding, that the American Army could win, and it could win on the battlefield, and it was just as good as any other army in existence at the time. And he also proved the Germans weren't the supermen. They didn't have the super guns, and they didn't have everything else that they had, propaganda had shown out. And so he did well. Had he not slapped that soldier in Sicily, he would have probably been the lead commander in the battle of from Normandy on, something he totally regretted. So he's a human being. He made mistakes, and he would have told you 1,000 times that he wished he had handled it differently. However, people forget about, there was 2 of them that he slapped. One was named Cruel, was named Bennett. But people forget about something. When someone was brought up on the same charges that Patton believed that these 2 were, Bradley had the guy shot. His name was Private Slovich, as an example. So there's a lot of history that kind of gets strewed around when you get bits and pieces, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to correct the record and tell it like it really was. And it's not me telling it; it's the people who were there telling it as they saw it.
That's the most admirable thing about what you have done and your 6-volume set. And I'm glad that you mentioned the poem. You made a reference to it, the Through a Glass Darkly. That, if listeners, y'all, if you have not read, I think it's about 24 stanzas, 26 stanzas. If you have not read through that poem, you need to. And then when you're done and you get the chills, read it again, and you're going to get the same chills. I mean, it is very powerful. I know Don and Henry probably got some other stuff that they're wanting to ask you. If you don't mind, Denny, I want to kind of shy away a little bit from Patton the man a little bit, because, it's an unbelievable credit that you have done to the history of Patton and the Third Army as an author. But our listeners may not know this. You not only have written this, you live this. You are also a Patton reenactor, and that is a whole nother ball of wax for you to take on that responsibility, to carry yourself as accurately as possible. So can you talk a little bit about how you got started there and the command vehicle that you have and everything?
Well, sure. Like everybody else, I love reenacting and living history, and thought it was a lot of fun when I was younger, and no one was playing personalities. And since I was reading about Patton, I thought, well, maybe I could portray him. And we did it at air shows and a few other places. And as I grew into the part, I realized that if I'm going to portray this person, I need to do it accurately. And so the first thing was to recreate his uniform, which is far more different than any other person in the field, with the riding breeches and the boots and the belt and the helmet. It's all different. And so to recreate that took quite a bit. And then when you recreate it, the first thing that people want to know is, do you really know about the man? So you had to have the history. So as time went on, we developed a group that we call Third Army Living Historians, and we do what is known as a war room. And we take exactly the things that occurred in the war room in Patton's headquarters, and we reproduce it for the public. So the public comes in, they sit down in chairs, and I stand there as Patton would and listen to the G1, the G2, the G3 of that particular period of time. We might do the Battle of the Bulge, we might do the Lorraine Campaign, all kinds of places we could do it. And as Patton, then I stand up and give the orders that he would have given and explain where they're going and why they're going. And that brings history alive. And so I've also done veterans. We did the 2nd Army Division. And when I was there at Killeen, right outside of Fort Hood, there were the real veterans in front of me. And, when you are talking to people who knew him, you've got to be on your mark. And the greatest compliment to me is a man came up to me who knew Patton and he said, his name was Willie, by the way, and he said, general, says, "Do you remember me?" Now he knew I wasn't the real general. And I said, "Well, sir, tell me a little bit." He says, "When I was in the barracks there, you were doing an inspection and I didn't have a coat. And you asked me where my coat was. And I said, they couldn't issue me one. They ran out. And they said that very day I had a coat." And he said, "All these years have passed. I've never got to thank you for it." And so he looked at me and saw the real general, and he finally said, "Thank you." And it came from his heart. So you get moments like that when you portray somebody. And of course I was just, awed by that. And what it told me, and what I began to understand when I'm portraying Patton, is people really do want to know who General Patton was and so for just a little while, I try to bring the person to them. And I've talked to many veterans who knew him, and I've talked to other folks. And so I try to portray him as if he were here. And someone asked me, "What do you think General Patton would have thought about that?" And I said, "Well, I think he would have been flattered, because I knew that he had played Sir Arthur and as a king, and he had played Brett Butler in plays, and he had dressed up several times. So he enjoyed living history and reenacting. And I think he would be flattered that somebody takes the time to recreate him." So our presentation, so if we're going to do that, well, we need to have the command car. So I took a WC-57 and put it back like General Patton had, with the armor in the front and the extra tailgate and the 50 caliber machine gun. And I had all the pictures of it. So I put it back to where if you put my command car by his pictures, you can't tell the difference. We did that with an M20 armored car and took it to the MVPA convention and won first place with it. And now that's not me. That's the people who helped me do it. I give credit, just like he did, to a lot of people that helped. And we do the Jeep, and I have a command van, his mobile headquarters. The original is still at the fort at the Patton Museum. So I got all the pictures and everything, and we recreated it. And ours, we think, is better than theirs, because ours runs and theirs just sit there. So we take it from place to place and let people walk through it. We even had the secret phone that works, that the green phone that he would call Bradley with and scrambled and talk about. In fact, it was on that very phone that one night he called Bradley and says, "I'm across." "Well, you're across what, Georgie?" "I'm across the Rhine. I beat Monty." And he was on that phone. So what we did, we made it work. So when kids come through and adults come through, we were at the 100th birthday for the real Third Army. They call it Argent. And I played General Patton, and the commander at the time was Lieutenant General Garrett. And we were there at the headquarters is at Shaw Air Force Base. So it's a very, you got to have a lot of stroke just to get to the front door. And they cleared us for the 100th birthday. We brought 20 living historians. I don't call them reenactors when we do a theatrical presentation. I call them living historians.
Sure.
And we gave the war room for the real Army. So I'm playing Patton, and General Garrett's there, and two brigadier generals are sitting in for where Hap Gay and General Gaffey would have been. And we briefed them on the oncoming Battle of the Bulge, exactly as Patton was briefed in 1944 at his headquarters. And they were, when you can do that for the U.S. Army, those are some of the nicest people, some of our great heroes. So I was humbled to be there, to actually be with our active duty soldiers at their headquarters at the real Third Army for the 100th birthday. It's something that for the rest of my life that I will always remember.
And I'll say this as somebody who, prior to COVID, me and my group down here, we've always had, for 2 years, we had the pleasure of being invited down to the Hilton in Tampa, Florida, and setting up our living history displays for the actual Army, for the Army birthday dinners. And I've said this on the podcast before, as a reenactor, sometimes you wonder what active military personnel think of you. Are you doing them a disservice? Are you playing Army? Or do they look down on you? Kind of like you were just saying when you did your war room for the active military. When they come up to you afterwards and they thank you for what you're doing, it kind of basically puts a seal of authenticity on your impression and makes you realize, okay, this is legitimate. I'm not a clown show. We're not a circus. When the real commanders and high-ranking officials of active modern-day Army come up and say, hey, your display is fantastic, the authenticity is great, it just makes you feel so much better about the time, energy, money, and effort that you spent on what you're doing. And I'm sure you probably felt the same way in that situation. And just to go back for the listeners at home who aren't familiar with the abbreviations, the MVPA is the Military Vehicle Preservation Association, and they do a great job not only with preserving military vehicles, but they'll actually come out to living history events, and just by having those Jeeps or a half track or a deuce and a half, whatever it may be that your local MVPA members have, it does such a great service to that event because it brings people in who may not be, when they're driving by, they may see some tents and not exactly what's going on, but when they see a couple of Jeeps lined up, some half tracks, deuce and a halves, command cars, what have you, it really does help to bring the crowd in and to help spread that message. And so I just want to make sure we give a shout out to anybody in any of the states who are a member of the MVPA.
Well, you're absolutely right. And the reenactors, living historians, they do something that is so needed today. You can go up to just about any of them and ask them about the gear that they're wearing, and they can tell you about it. They can tell you where it comes from. You can sometimes ask them about the history of the unit that they're portraying or the people that they're portraying, and they can tell you. And that, when young children come and they see that, it just brightens their day because a lot of them love that kind of thing. And what we do is we also point to the current military, and we explain while we're doing our reenactments what the real heroes really are in this world. And it is our military, our police, and our first responders. So we also point toward them and tell them that Patton knew what George Washington had said, in time of peace, plan for war, in time of war, plan for peace. And we have to explain that we are not through fighting wars, but we have the finest men and women in the world who are volunteering to be that difference between the enemy out there and our protection. So we do explain to that. And we also talk about the wounded warriors and those with PTSD and the things that they're coming back from. So it's not just a history thing. And our reenactors do that. If you've ever gone to a reenactment and people listen to this, they need to go and talk to these people. They've spent hundreds to thousands of dollars on their impression. Nobody paid for it. They bought it themselves.
Yeah, we've discussed that before, where sometimes you'll talk to civilians and they're like, so what do you do? Just show up and walk into a trailer full of gear? No, all this stuff's privately owned. That's why this guy down here who does communications, he's got all the field telephones. He can tell you every little meticulous detail about that because he bought them on his own. He restored them. The guy down there with the typewriter or the guy at the medic tent and all the little bottles and everything, he can tell you every minute detail because he or she researched all that information to make sure that their impression is spot on. And going back to what you're saying about Patton and how he kind of in his own way was a living historian, people don't realize this, and we are getting more and more into the term of living historian and not dropping and not using the word reenactor so much unless it's an actual reenactment. But living history is almost one of the oldest versions of history. I mean, if you think about it, the war dances that the Native Americans were doing, they were telling the history of their tribe in past wars. And, and so going all the way from there to nowadays, before you had widespread published papers, people would share their history, whether they're Native Americans, Civil War, Vietnam, or people in Brazilian rainforest somewhere. They have their own version of how to tell the story of their ancestors and the battles or what have you, whatever that particular topic of their presentation is. It goes back a long, long way, and we're just doing our own modern spin on it.
You bring up a great point, and I know I've said this on our podcast before. I think it's worth saying again that coming back from over there is exactly why I got into reenacting, because you knew then, I realized then that this could not be forgotten. I mean, I thought I knew a little bit about war from the books I read as a kid, but nothing like when you're in the real thing. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And for all of the civilian reenactors out there, keep doing what you're doing, because I don't know anybody that I would have served with that would would talk down to somebody who's trying to keep their memory alive or the memory of their forefathers alive through military living history and reenactments. Because without the reenactors, after the war is gone, then it just goes off into oblivion and to be forgotten. But without reenactors and living historians to keep it alive, then they're the ones keeping it alive for everybody. I can't stress that enough. And I've learned that the living history community is really such a tight knit group. And like you said, Don, it isn't cheap. I know there's people who aren't as fortunate that that have the opportunity to do living history, but I hope one day they do, because it's a certain kind of person to have that kind of passion and to dedicate themselves to telling that story that needs to be told.
Oh, and by the way, to kind of go on what I was saying earlier, you don't have to just have an interest in World War II. The interesting thing about living history and reenacting is it's dynamic. It's alive. And what I mean by that is I got in World War II because my grandfather served. And, Henry's not a reenactor, but he got into the history of World War II because of his family dynamic, and Jeff, the people he grew up around. But it's interesting now to see that the Vietnam reenacting is starting to get real big because the grandchildren of Vietnam veterans want to know what their grandparents went through and their grandparents' generation goes through. And I've actually seen young cats talking about doing, early Desert Storm impressions and all that. And so as the veterans, the children of veterans who served in Iraq War and Iraqi Freedom, Desert Storm, some of their children are starting to try to find that era. And so it's not just a World War II thing or World War I thing. As the children and grandchildren of the veterans who served in whatever campaign get older, that always seems to be where their interest lies. So down here in Florida, I'm seeing a lot more and more cats getting into the Vietnam stuff. So it's interesting to see the way it goes.
Well, you can't tell too much history. The more you know history, the more you can predict the future. Patton would have told you that it keeps repeating itself. They fight with different arms, they fight in different ways, but they're still people. And if you know what people will do, what soldiers will do in any given battle at any given time, or what the politics of the battles or the way the war progressed or why it started, then you can see these things as they begin to build up again in history. There's always going to be tyrants. There's always going to be people who want to run the world, and there's always going to be standing armies out there. They may not be fought with bows and arrows or flintlocks, but they're going to be fought, and we have to have people who are willing to stand up to it. And so if we know our history and we know why these things took place, then we can be ever vigilant. And that's another thing that reenactors teach, and they do it quite well, that you must always be prepared for the next war. And the way you learn about the next war is by learning about the war before, what caused it. And that's as important as sitting down. And I mean, people love to wear the uniforms, and they love to go out and shoot the blanks out of the firearms. But they also know what it took for the soldiers to go out and do that. And they represent probably one of the finest. And it's not just in the U.S. Europe has got a huge set of reenacting groups, and they perpetuate the European history. And World War II reenacting is a lot of fun out there, and they enjoy it. And the other thing is they're keeping these vehicles. I've seen people take Jeeps that had trees growing in them and spend the time and the money, and before they're done, it looks exactly as it did in World War II or Vietnam. And that is the restoration of history. And that's another thing that's so important for what we do. Look at the planes. I'll be going to an air show in Texas, and me and Jeff will be there, and we'll see these warbirds up there. And when you look at a warbird from World War II, know that just about every rivet in it was put there by a woman, and that we had women test pilots, and they were up there flying these things before they ever went to the men. And it was such most all of these planes were built with such a love that they wanted every single thing to be perfect in it before it was delivered to the soldiers. We call the World War II generation the greatest generation, well, there was a generation behind them, their moms and dads, the great generation who built all that stuff so that they could go to war. And it's been the same in all the way through the different wars.
Not to mention the engineers who did that on drafting tables with paper and manual equipment. They weren't running AutoCAD and running computer programs and simulated wind tunnels. They were doing that all with their brain, paper, and drafting tools. That's even crazier to think that all the aerospace stuff was all figured out with math and smart engineers.
There's a famous soldier about a commander of an American submarine who had a sub he was trying to hit, and it's at an odd angle, and they couldn't see it, but he figured out where it was going to be mathematically and how long it'd take the torpedo to get there, and figured it out on the table and told him when to shoot. No computer, just math on a piece of paper.
Yeah, just like all the pilots and their navigators in the planes. They're doing it all in real time with math.
So getting back to a little bit about Patton, and he was not the old fella who was living in the past. He was an innovator. Any time that he could find something new that he thought would help win a battle, he got into it and perpetuated it. And he, at the end of the war, he called all of his heads of the different branches, and he said, "Okay, what worked and what didn't? I want you to make a report." And so they would look at the armor and say, "Well, this in the armor worked well, and this thing was a piece of junk. We don't need 37 millimeters on 6-wheel vehicles. That won't work. We need mobile artillery. We need time on target. We need all these things." So what occurred after the war was just as important as what occurred during the war. They looked at what worked and what didn't, and they planned for the future. And so that too is part of the Patton mystique, because he realized that we weren't through fighting wars. And that his son, a colonel in Vietnam, and later rose to major general, and he was assigned to Germany there as our threat was there in case Russia did something. So another war. The son from the Vietnam War looking toward to end the Cold War. So it keeps on keeping on.
At the top of the interview, when you're talking about doing your book and how the family was a little reluctant, what you found out, reluctant, the first thing I thought is here's a family who had a member who all throughout the war had all these articles written about them, all these publications, newsreels. And there's an old saying, which I've experienced myself working in radio around here for 6 years and doing some freelance stuff with the local media, and I stopped, which is you never realize how inaccurate the news is until they do an article on you. And I wonder at that point in time, the family's just like, you know what? We're done with all the inaccurate stories, or the authors clearly trying to sell their narrative and not so much on the actual history of the events or the truth behind our family member. I almost wonder if that was why they just kind of got reluctant after a while.
Well, I'll tell you what they said. They were afraid for the sons of George Patton's son, and they were afraid for the son-in-laws who were married to his kids, because had the truth come out of what Patton believed to be the truth, which has pretty well turned out to be the truth, had it come out then during the politics, it was pretty strong, they would not have advanced the way, because they would have been scapegoats, or at least they certainly believed that they would have been. So when George Patton, he wrote the stuff and he sent it home, and Colonel Hawkins, who later became a 4-star general and one of the advisors for the Patton movie, he got with Beatrice after the war, and they took and wrote together War as I Knew It from Patton's notes. And they knew they had to be very careful what they put in it. What's in it's true, but what they left out is a tremendous amount of material which would have changed the way people understood it. It was a bestseller at the time. There was 2 other books at the time that were written directly from about who were in Patton's headquarters. One by Wallace, who was liaison chief, Colonel Wallace, and then the other one was from his assistant G2, Robert Allen, and both of those were bestsellers as well. But as time went on, Patton's memory dimmed. The movie brought it back to life. Had it not been for the movie, people probably wouldn't know what I portray today. But the family said, okay, it's been long enough. So Martin Blumenson, who had been a World War II veteran and a fantastic historian and author, he was given the first access to the Patton papers. And he wrote a 2-volume set of the Patton papers based on everything. Patton kept everything from the time he was a kid till he passed away, every single piece of paper, every note, every order, everything. And so he was able to draw from that. When the Patton papers came out, people said, whoa, there's a lot more to this man. And more books began to come out. And then finally the Patton family said, okay, it's time. And they donated the entire collection to the Library of Congress, and they put open domain to it. That means it's open to the public, no copyrights. You want to go research and find out about stuff, it's there. So I sent a researcher that was working there, and I said, okay, I can't come up here to get all this material. So the researcher I had on weekends, she'd go up there with a camera, and she'd go through the entire Patton papers and take a picture of it at about 450 DPI. I have 86 gigs of the Patton
The world's
papers.
largest PDF file.
Good Lord.
As a computer guy, I know that if the resolution on a PDF file is larger than 100, you can only fit like 5 pages in that PDF file. So I can imagine how big yours
slow
is.
emails.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And that's how
I
I got the
have both
dowry.
copies of the Patton papers. I cracked it open once, and I thought, no thanks.
In your research, did you come across any firsthand accounts or maybe retellings of Patton's feelings of being kind of, I don't know if I would say put on the sidelines, but kind of being put in charge of the quote unquote ghost army to help sell the deception of, the mislandings of where we were going to land in France?
Yeah, he didn't mind that a bit. And the reason he didn't, he was secret. When Eisenhower came back from a vacation, a secret vacation from 1943 to 44, and took over as the Allied commander, as Roosevelt had named him Supreme Allied Headquarters Commander. And he knew he wanted to keep Patton. So Patton was there last part of February. He was told then at the time, you got the command, but we need a rouge. And the rouge had already begun. And so he was in Operation Fortitude, where he was going to be the fake commander. That's one of the reasons for those speeches, by the way. Where he gets, first of all, he didn't stand up in a speech and said, no bastard ever won a war but dying for a country. He wanted other for it. He never started his speech that way. It was all hand done, and it was all him. But he gave those speeches all over United Kingdom and into Ireland to the troops that he knew would be fighting under him. Of course, they didn't know it. A lot of them didn't. And the reason he did is they wanted the German spies, who were actually, a lot of them were counterintelligence spies, to see him and hear him and know he was there, even though he was a secret. That was part of the rouge. And they never mentioned Third Army. It was just he was going to be the First Army commander. And he even gave a speech, one of his speeches like you see in the movie, but without the medals, and it was a lot longer, on the 5th day of June. Now, on the 5th day of June, we had the ships out there waiting to see if they were going to come back or they were going to land on the 6th. So he was still giving the speech so the Germans could know he was still in England, so that he was going to lead the force. And Hitler bought into it. He thought that there still was going to be another, even after he's told the Normandy invasion, he was still waiting for Patton, and the invasion he thought was going to concur. So it worked. Now, it wouldn't work today with all the satellites and stuff, but it worked then. And it was that surprise that gave them the thrust that they needed. So Patton, even though he wasn't actually at the first invasion, he was very much a part of it. And he didn't mind that a bit. He thought that was a good thing, but he was really anxious to get his Third Army in there. So his G2 would give him all the reports of the things that were happening on the beaches. And he kept up with all of the Army units that were there, and all the German units, because he knew he'd be facing the German units. So his intelligence was superb. And so when he came onto the continent, he knew exactly what he was facing. And of course, he was also briefed by Bradley and by Montgomery, and they sit down, and they weren't the enemies that the movie would have you think of them. They knew that they had to be professional soldiers and get the job done. So they would sit down, they shared information right there at the beginning of it. And Montgomery was actually in charge of all the ground forces. And he was in charge of all the ground forces for quite some time until they reverted back to the commands like Bradley took. So it was an interesting political issue out at that time too.
Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like Jeff stepped away. I was attending to some production here on the back end. Back at the beginning, you were talking about how Patton had a photographic memory and he was studying the maps, and it occurred to me, well, that would probably help explain how he was able to accomplish what he accomplished in such a fast manner. Not only did he know of the battlefields of the past, but he knew of the routes that the quote-unquote good guys took and the bad guys took and which ones worked. And so he knew not to relive the troop movements that failed and to, readjust in modern day so that he can get through those areas quicker, because he knew from reading the past and the maps and his history where things could cause bottlenecks or break down due to geographical makeup. So I'm sure that really his photographic memory, his lust for history and all things military probably was a huge proponent and a huge contribution to how well he was able to move.
It was a lot of it, but he understand that he had one of the finest intelligence services that any army had. It's held by Colonel Oscar Koch, and Koch kept a running tally of all the German units worldwide, and he knew what happened to them when they were decimated, when they were changed. And it was Colonel Koch who predicted 9 days before the Battle of the Bulge that there was an enemy buildup, and he pretty well had an idea where it was going to be in the Ardennes, because everything else had radio traffic and there was total silence at the Ardennes, and he knew what units were missing, and he had tracked them from Russia, from Italy. The German army moved on trains, and the spies were all over Europe, and they knew what was on these trains and what units were on these trains. And all of a sudden they disappeared. They had no radio silence, didn't know where they were. So he gave a report to Patton that of the troop buildup, that they didn't know exactly where they were. And he said it was conceivable that they had the troops to attack. Now, they didn't know exactly where, but they had an idea. So Patton sent that information up, and he was involved in a battle called Operation Tink, which was supposed to go all the way to Frankfurt and go through the Siegfried Line. And he actually had a German lieutenant general who had agreed to help him go through the Siegfried Line. And he told him where all of the stuff was. He told his G2 anyway, and they checked it out because he helped set up the Siegfried Line. His name was Hans Schaefer, and he had been captured in, I'm telling you new history that most people don't know anything about. It's in the books and where it came from. But so he had been there. He was a Prussian extracted professional soldier, and he knew that Germany was going to lose the war. He knew that Hitler would fight on until he was in, and he didn't want to see that happen to his country. So he gave information to the G2 Koch about how to take the Siegfried Line. And they were in the process of fixing to do that with the heavy bombers, and General Doolittle was in on it, and Spats and the whole business. They were going to bomb, and then they were going to take two armies and go all the way through Frankfurt when the Battle of the Bulge began to take place on the 16th of December, which Patton stopped in his tracks. And this is where the brilliance of the man came about. He kept a Bruges going on of the battle he was in. He told the 4th Armored Division to move and two other divisions to move, and they moved toward Bastogne. And he directed that personally himself. He was in Hapgay, who was the assistant commander of 3rd Army, and it was at Nancy, France. And Patton then went to Luxembourg with Bradley, and Patton conducted with communications back forth what to do, and then he had a good hand in what they were planning with Oscar Koch, and that's how they went toward and got into the Battle of the Bulge, which lasted about to the 31st of December. Then there's another story about his chaplain, which the movie doesn't bring out, and I want to bring that out. People have talked about Patton and his colorful language. And yes, he used it a lot, but he was also went to church every time he could on Sunday. And he called his chaplain, which was and Chaplain Hugh O'Neill. And he said, look, we're in a spot here. He says, this is the Lorraine campaign when it was pouring down rain. He says, we need a prayer. But before I talk about the prayer we need, he says, let me ask you something. Do the soldiers, are they able to pray? And if you know anything about the liturgy of the Catholic and the Episcopal Church, and Patton was an Episcopal, there's not much personal praying. He says, I want personal praying. I want these soldiers to have a chance in the services to get down on their knees and ask the Lord to protect them and to bring us out of this. So he issued an instructional letter number 5 through his chaplain, and it went to 400 and something different chaplains throughout his entire army, that they were to give the soldiers a chance to actually pray. And they did. That's something that's not known by a lot of people. And the prayer, the chaplain never say, like he did in the movie, well, sir, I don't know how the Lord would receive it. That's baloney. That was never said. Chaplain O'Neill went back and he looked through his books and he thought about it a lot. And he came up with the prayer. And it was for the Lorraine campaign, but it didn't get actually issued till a little bit later. And he had 250,000 cards with the Christmas greeting and the prayer. Now, no other general I can think of ever sent prayers out to his men. And he believed in the Lord, and he believed in praying a lot. He got down on his knees, and he wasn't ashamed to do that. And Chaplain O'Neill later wrote it all down, and it was published in some oral interviews that he did. So we know what actually really happened. And he always gave credit to the Almighty. He never took the credit himself. He said, I hope the Lord will see us through with this. I hope the Lord will see us through with that. We forget that today. Somehow praying and going to the Lord and saying, asking for help, and when we are hurt and when we have loved ones hurt, we forget to go to the Lord sometimes. But they did then. And they knew that they were in the fight for their life, and they knew that if they lost this battle, and they could have lost it, that the world would be forever changed. So praying was a very important part of those soldiers' lives, and Patton was leading that.
You're absolutely right. I'm really glad you brought that up, Denny. Usually about this time in our show, we do a book review. But how about this for a book review? Where can people buy your books before we get to our round table here? Final thoughts. Where can people get your books at? Where can they buy them?
Get it only in one place, and that's Amazon.
Yeah, I'm on your website. I'm on your page on Amazon, and people can actually just go to Amazon, type in Denny Hare, and you can do the follow the author. They have all his publications up there. All the books are there, as well as a bio, and you can click follow, and anytime any new information comes up, any projects, it'll notify them. Are you working on any new projects right now?
I've toyed with putting another book out about Patton in World War I. I have a lot of information about how he went into tanks and how he developed the light tank and how it fought in World War I, what he did. I have quite a bit, and I've toyed with that, and I'm considering it. It just takes so much time to write one and to get it exactly like he wants. Sure. And so I'm thinking about it.
Well, as always, we will post a link to your Amazon page as well as your website and your Instagram page on our website, WTSP, tomorrow when this episode goes live. And I want to tell you, we appreciate your time and thank you for coming on. Once again, it's author Mr. Denny Hare. You guys have any follow-up statements before we let Mr. Hare go, and then we'll finish up the show?
And Denny, I just want to say again, thank you for coming on, and I'm really looking forward to working with you here in about 8 weeks at our Blue Bonnet Air Show right here in Burnett. I'll let you in on a little secret. I closed the museum today, starting today, up until about the weekend before the air show for some much needed renovations. So I'm going to be working up there in the evenings and weekends, and we got a whole crew coming in to really upgrade that museum to the standard that it needs to be. So look forward to showing that off, and look forward to seeing you, Denny.
Well, listen, it was a pleasure to meet you gentlemen tonight, and I hope that we can meet one day in person. Of course, I will meet with Jeff, but I hope I can meet the rest of you guys, and I wish you a good 2022.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Activated based on the recommendation of the Advisory Committee on Negro Troop Policies, chaired by the Assistant Secretary of War John J. McCloy, Chief of Staff George C. Marshall approved the committee's recommendation for a black parachute battalion and decided to start with a company. And on February 25th, 1943, the 555th Parachute Infantry Company was constituted. On December 19th, 1943, headquarters of the Army Ground Forces authorized the activation of the company as an all-black unit with black officers as well as black enlisted men. All unit members would be volunteers with an enlisted cadre to be selected from personnel of the 92nd Infantry Division, stationed out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. The company was officially activated on December 30th, 1943 at Fort Bennings, Georgia. After several months of training, the unit moved to Camp McCall, North Carolina, where it was reorganized and redesignated on November 25th, 1944 as Company A of the newly activated 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion. Due to its numerical designation, as well as the fact that 17 of its original 20 members were selected from the 92nd Infantry Buffalo Division, the 555th PIB would adopt the nickname the Triple Nickels, hence the origin of the term Buffalo Nickels. And though combat ready and alerted for European duty in late 1944, the changing tides of war resulted in a different assignment, jumping over the blazing forest of the American Northwest searching for Japanese balloon bombs, a job requiring exact skills and special courage. In this unusual role, the 555th also confronted a new dimension in warfare, involving the use of biological agents that could destroy woodlands and crops, but not humans. These men soon became known as smoke jumpers. At this stage in the war, the Japanese began floating incendiary devices attached to balloons across the Pacific Ocean, taking advantage of its jet stream's easterly flow in an attempt to start forest fires all over the northwest of the United States. The Forestry Service asked the military for help, and the Triple Nickels were ready, willing, and able. The battalion answered some 36 fire calls with more than 1,200 individual jumps during the summer of 1945. Operating from Pendleton and Chico, California, the operations covered all the northwestern states, including Montana. During fire operations, the battalion suffered numerous injuries, but only one fatality. Malvin L. Brown, a medic assigned to the battalion's headquarters company, died on August 6, 1945, after falling during a letdown from a tree near Roseburg, Oregon. His death is the first recorded smoke jumper fatality during a fire jump. When the battalion was inactivated on December 15, 1947, its men were all transferred into 3rd Battalion 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which had been reduced to a cadre strength to prepare for their arrival. Soon afterwards, individual black paratroopers were transferred to units throughout the 82nd Airborne Division, making it the first integrated division in the United States Army. And we want to thank Denny once again for coming on, and thank you guys for hanging out with us. We're not done yet. I just want to throw that little history lesson in there, seeing how this is Martin Luther King Day. And anyhow, we have kind of exciting news, I guess. As per Jeff's request, we do have an official What's the Scuttlebutt podcast Instagram page. So now you don't have to see all my personal nonsense on our page. But that is actually going to be managed by all three of us. And while we're on the topic, for the first time since 2018, and what I want to say is pretty much my opinion. Doesn't exactly express the opinions of Jeff or Henry, but for the first time since 2018, as you guys know, last week we had on Matt De Palma, who is a German reenactor and German historian. We actually had a photo removed, and this isn't the first time we've had German reenactors on. Matt was the third one. We don't have a whole hell of a lot of them on here, but we've had enough where I've posted photos, and even on the Weimar Republic uniforms, they have the eagle and the swastika. But in the overly sensitive cancel culture days we have now, at least based on my opinion, Facebook took down that photo and also put us under restriction for the next 23 days. And so if you are a subscriber to the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast Facebook page and you don't see any of our posts, that's because one of the penalties is Facebook let us know they're going to be burying our post on people's timelines for the next 23 days. So you may want to go ahead and, ironically, I know Instagram's owned by Facebook, so it really doesn't matter. But please head over to Instagram and follow us there at WTSP World War II. And let's get back to and while you're on the internet looking at Instagram, please head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on Patreon, sign up and subscribe. It only costs you $1.50 a month, and that goes a long way to support the podcast. But what do you guys have in the way of books for this week?
Well, as Jeff and I were talking about, I finished Spearhead. I read Bomber Boys. Right now I'm reading. Can you guys read that, or is it backwards?
No, it's good.
Robert Sherrod's book, History of Marine Corps Aviation, World War II. It'll take me a while to get through that. So that's what I'm in now.
I am, I'm halfway through this Peleliu Tragic Triumph, and I was reading a paragraph that kind of went into a description I had never heard explained before, but one of the hypotheses that the author was floating that apparently he had heard throughout the history world was they think it's kind of odd that during the invasion that the Japanese artillery and bombardments kind of lightened up. And some people don't know if it was to protect their backlog of ammunition, or I guess some people kind of floated the idea that the Japanese knew that they weren't going to win that battle, but maybe they need to slow it down and drag it out as long as possible to slow down the Marine Corps advance on their island hopping campaign. And there's just a quick paragraph where he kind of made it sound like it's almost the Japanese said, okay, or at least the ones on the island said, okay, we've hit them, caused a lot of casualties, but let's slow down the beach landing bombardment to make this campaign drag out longer to prevent them from just mowing through and moving on to the next island. I've never really heard that suggested before, but it was a weird paragraph that kind of popped up in that book.
Yeah, it's been a lot of years since I read that one, but I mean, really, if you think about it, Peleliu kind of was where they really started going defense in depth. You know, with the idea at first being that you're not going to stop them from landing. Mm-hmm. The idea is to bleed them dry as they advance inland.
And as they had already learned from Guadalcanal and New Britain and all that, Banzai charge is just a
and
waste.
Denny and Royd, yeah.
Banzai charge is just a big waste of manpower, and especially when you're trying to slow down the charge to your home island, you need to change tactics at a certain point.
Take that thought process on out at Okinawa, where they barely oppose the landing at all.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What say you, Jeffrey?
Oh yeah, so I'm still working on Spearhead. I was telling Henry I thought I'd be done with it by this episode, but I've kind of slowed down a little bit. I had some personal things coming up, and again with closing the museum and trying to concentrate on that. Now the stopwatch begins now to get this done before our air show on the 19th of March. But it's funny. The Spearhead is the first one, and for people who don't know and they're watching, it's Adam Makos' Spearhead. It's an incredible book. I know Henry's been in touch with him, and I think simultaneously when he was emailing you, he was sending me messages through Instagram, and him and I had a really great little chat through Instagram about the stories that we can't wait to share when he is eventually on our podcast when he has the time. So I think that's huge news for us and for our listeners. But that is probably the first book that I have read strictly about armored warfare. And I've been looking through my shelves and my books and everything. I don't have another one, and I'm almost kind of, while I'm hung up on it, I kind of want to read one more before I shift over. I mean, of course, you get into the end of February, it's tough to not read about Iwo Jima.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just the anniversaries. I don't know. It could go either way. And Henry and I are probably the only dorks that think about stuff like that.
Well, I mean, Jeff, you're right. It's too cold to be. I mean, normally I wouldn't be diving into Pacific stuff, but I'm working with the guys on Cowboy Stout's cousin. We're collaborating on a film about him, and so I'm I'm wanting to just absorb myself in marine aviation as much as I can. But yeah, I mean, one of the books I got for Christmas was Alamo and the Ardennes, by John McManus, and I was starting to read that, and I thought, well, wait a minute, man, I've really got to read this marine aviation book. But so, Jeff, are you saying you really want to read another armor book?
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way. Of course, it depends. So I'm starting my undergrad for history program the end of February. I don't know how much spare time I'm going to have, and I'll be honest, I've got I don't know how much our listeners care about what we're talking about right now, but I've got a collection of it's called World's Greatest Literature. It's a 20-volume set, was published in the mid-30s. It's all hardbound books. It's up on my fireplace mantle, and it's stuff like Ben-Hur and stuff done by Edgar Allan Poe, Moby Dick, autobiography of Ben Franklin, Ivanhoe, things like that. And one of them is Plutarch, and a collection of Themistocles and Alcibiades and Cicero. And I've kind of been just veering off. I just finished a course about the Peloponnesian Wars and Athens and Sparta, and started just kind of reading about we make so many connections. I think so many people make a connection, and we talk about the Roman Empire and this and that and the other thing, but I really kind of wanted to really understand. Honestly, the next time I watch the Patton movie, I want to know a little bit more what he's talking about the Carthaginians and, and things like that, So I'm trying to, I don't know, I'm back and forth. But I think after the air show and it'll really start warming up here, I've actually do have a couple books. I've got about 15, 16 just on Iwo Jima, and there's a couple I haven't read yet. So I may get back into Iwo.
Yeah, I never thought about it. Maybe that's why I do so much studying on the Pacific, just because I live in Florida and it's just damn hot all year round, with the exception of like the 2 weeks right now. I mean, it's like 60 degrees out, and here I am wearing a t-shirt and a long sleeve shirt and sweatpants because
I envy you.
That, and I spent the weekend up in Georgia, which, by the way, shout out to Jeremy Petrella and the guys up in Georgia who put that event on. The numbers were a little lower this year, I think, mixed primarily not because of COVID as far as the disease goes, but probably because of COVID and inflation and people losing hours and jobs like that, just making that long haul. We still had a great weekend.
What part of Georgia were you in, Don?
It's technically it's called Lanier, Georgia, but it's a small ass town. T-Mobile, I could only get one bar, and the only time I could use my phone was standing out in the middle of the field, which is a huge improvement because the last 3 years I'd have to drive into Lanier and go hop on Burger King's Wi-Fi to make a phone call. So T-Mobile is getting some, but the biggest city nearby would be Valdosta, Georgia.
Yeah,
and so it's a quick hop. It was a 5-hour drive from my house. I actually traded my Tundra for my dad's Tacoma, so I went from a V8 down to a V6 so I could save some money on some gas. And it's kind of cool because when you go up the interstate, they actually take you off on the back roads, and so you actually make the drive over Georgia, the transition from Florida over to Georgia through back roads instead of over the interstate. And it's a good time. It's actually at a Boy Scout camp, interestingly enough, called Camp Patton. People don't realize this. You can rent Boy Scout camps. Because they don't use them all the time. And so we discovered this a few years back. We rent out this Boy Scout camp. I left here 5 o'clock Friday morning, got up there around 10, 11-ish. We did a tactical event on Friday. I tracked it with my phone. It was a shorter event. The Germans kind of called it quit a little early, but that's fine. We still did 2.5 miles of hiking through the woods on Friday. And then we ate some food and got up early Saturday morning, started out Saturday morning at 9, and then around 11:30 we circled back and did a public reenactment right on the edge of the field so the public could see us because the tactical's all back in the woods. And then we took a lunch break and then did another secondary public event at 2 o'clock. And this is the Malmedy massacres. So this event is about Malmedy. And so one of the interesting things we try to do is at the early show on Saturday, we had me and about 6 or 7 people, we were kind of patrolling through the woods, and we did the whole thing where they took us captive after a little skirmish, and they walked us down in the woods out of the sight of the public. And then we all, even though, because the public's not going to know the difference between a bolt action Mauser versus an M1. So all of us down in the woods would just start shooting up in the air to give the sound of the massacre as the PA system was explaining about the massacre and all that. So we did that. We had, you know, I don't know, like I said, it was a smaller event this year. We probably had 20, 30 allies, probably 20, 25 Germans, and about 8, Dutch, 8 partisans out there. And the cool thing is we actually had 2 guys doing Scottish and a British impression. So that's always fun to have some of the other allies out there. Because usually, you know, you go to an event, it's people, you'll have some infantry and some airborne guys, but we actually had 2 Scottish impersonators and a British impersonator. It was pretty cool.
I was just talking about that the other day, you know, with my living history unit out here, Company B, that I stood up a year or so ago. You know, it's not, I wanted to make sure that people understood when they get involved, you know, it's not just World War II, because that museum has an M60 tank and you know, a bunch of other post-war artifacts. So there's a couple of us that are doing some Vietnam stuff. But I mentioned the other, I said, man, we need a British World War II reenactor. That would just really be a great conversation piece and really lend dignity to, you know, it was an ally effort. The war was not won by the Americans. So we do have some British and Russian artifacts on display in the museum. So, you know, to be able to portray that side too is important.
We have a guy down here, and from a distance, it looks great. He took like an old Jeep Cherokee chassis and he made a British command car, you know, the armored command cars. And of course, all the armor is just made out of plywood, but from across the field, it looks like the real deal. And so he'll get down every once in a while, and or he'll go out to events where they have some of the British, you know, he'll come out in the command car, and he actually has the right footwear and everything. It does a really good job. And he wasn't there this year, but he usually takes that up to Georgia and drives it through the woods. And if you go to my YouTube channel and you look at the video from last year, you'll see it driving down the street. Like I said, from across the field and from 20 feet away, it looks like, you know, real armor and all that, but he basically built it out of a Jeep Cherokee and wood and other things, and just to get the job done. Because obviously you're not going to find a command car over here in the States without spending a small fortune to import the thing and restore it over here. So, and but no, it was a good time. A lot of driving, but all in all, it was a good time, and can't wait to do it again next year. And hopefully more and more people show up every year, and because we were kind of predicting this earlier when it comes to the reenacting living history stuff with COVID and just the way the wind's blowing. It seems like every year there's less and less of them to go to, which is sad. So hopefully we get over this COVID policy stuff and people start showing up to events. And
Don, do you think that applies to everything, like Civil War, World War II, whatever? I mean, does that across the board just kind of?
Yeah. Well, the problem we're having down here in Florida is they had this in the Civil War realm. I forget the name of the town. We had something raid. It'd been going on for 45 years down here. And last year, the year before, they killed it. First time in 45 years, and that one was done. That was a huge Civil War one. The problem we face in Florida ever since the Pulse night club shooting, any Florida state-owned park, we can no longer do weapons demonstrations with firearms that carry brass cartridges. So that basically leaves you can do your Revolutionary War, your Civil War, your Spanish-American War, but World War I, World War II, Vietnam, all that stuff's out now. And as living historians, we don't mind showing up and setting up the tents and setting up the displays, but Jeff can tell you as much as anybody, if you're not making noise with some blanks at least twice a day, people aren't as happy to come out and watch the show.
Well, it's a huge part of it.
Yeah. And then kind of like I was saying earlier, I don't think it's so much as reenactors concerned about getting COVID as much as people's jobs being affected, inflation.
Right.
I know my income since COVID as a small business owner has been hit traumatically over the last 2 years. Just, you know, when you're a small business whose job it is to service other small businesses, and I think what the status was like 45 to 50% of small businesses in the country went out of business. People just don't have the expendable income to drive 4 or 5 hours, spend a couple $100 on blanks and things like that. And so I think that has and a lot of employers may not allow cats to take a day or two off right now to make that drive down. So I think that probably has a more bigger impact than fears and concerns of getting sick does. At least down here in Florida, where no one wears masks unless they go in a place that's owned by a corporate company whose corporate office is located in a different state. So that's kind of how you can tell when you go to a store where their corporate office is located by if they mandate. Just about everybody's employees wear them for legal reasons, but if they have signs forcing their customers to wear them, at least down here in Florida, you kind of know where their corporate office is located. But yeah, so it's definitely. I need to slow down. I'm gonna have to take my boots over to a cobbler. My seams, you know how on the old World War II boots they're all sewn with that heavy gauge thread. The soles are sewn on. My boots are starting to separate. Luckily, they didn't blow out, so I can take them over to a cobbler and have them re-sew them up. But yeah, I gotta get some maintenance done on my boots finally after all these years.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm in the same boat. I've got to put heel pads on my jump boots. They're just about worn away, and of course that's a lot easier than having them sewn on. You know, they're just nailed in there. But
ironically, these are jump boots because when it comes to, I have two pairs of boots. I got my Bruno Dockers from my Marine Corps impression, and then when I do infantry, I just put leggings on over my jump boots, and they just look like the early service shoes. But yeah, that's actually right at the bridge of my foot where that's sewn together. It's not the heel or the pad, but that bridge on my left boot, it's separating. And luckily, I'm wearing leggings, and so it kind of that strap that goes underneath your foot kind of helped secure that this weekend. But before I do another event, at least when it's going to require running, squatting, ducking, diving, and crawling, I'm going to have to go get those soles re-sewn on.
Yeah.
But that, and I really need to have my M1 gear end serviced. I think my op rod has a slight twist in it, and it happened 3 times where I'm field stripping my gun in the field during reactment. I'll get a little extra hot round, and my charging handle will get dislodged from my bolt. So the bolt just stays back, and so I then have to field strip it and put the damn thing back together. And so my gun really needs some good servicing too. But, you know, when you're putting blanks to those things, and it's a freaking 80-year-old rifle, what do you expect, right? So, well, Henry, do you got anything to plug before we wrap up the show, or anything else you want to talk about?
No, just let's see. I think the only thing I got coming up is first week of February. I'll be on World War II TV again with Paul Woodadge, who I think isn't he on our calendar for January 31st?
Yes, I believe so. I'll have to double check off.
So,
there.
Other than that, that's really it.
Oh, I want to let you two know that I ran into I've said this in the past. Sometimes I feel like, sometimes you guys kind of feel like we do this show for ourselves. We know people listen, but it's always a little weird when someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, by the way, I love the podcast." And so I had a couple people come up and they complimented you two and said you guys are a great addition to the show, and they really love the show. And a lot of them, it's always funny, a lot of them, to kind of get themselves in the mood, they listen to the show while driving to events. And so I just wanted to let you guys know that
that's cool to hear.
People sent you guys some love, and words getting out there.
Thanks for telling us that, man.
Yeah, I feel all warm and funny inside.
Don,
I'll let you know. I'll let you in on this. The very last film fest that Walking Point is a part of is coming up in February, and it's kind of a full circle. It's the Austin Revolution Film Fest, or otherwise known as ARF, and a lot of things in the Walking Point story and how that movie came to be kind of spawned from ARF, including, you remember Liza, the main actress.
Yep.
RJ and Chelsea kind of stumbled on her at an ARF fest, I guess, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and we're like, hey, that's our leading lady, and the rest is history. So there's talk that a lot of us are going to be, it's kind of almost like a reunion now, to go out there. And so I don't know if there's a virtual option, because this is a live film fest, but I don't know if there'll be a virtual option too for people to watch or not. But we're going to screen on Friday, February 18th. And then the 19th is kind of the awards dinner and the after party and everything. That's the last day of the event. So the wife and I are going to go down there on Saturday. There's no way we could see the screening on Friday, but I've seen the movie a couple times. But yeah, I think a lot of the main cast is going to try to be there.
That's awesome.
Kind of see each other once again. the main co-star Josiah, he's Atlanta based, so he's coming out, and then of course Lou is coming from the LA area. So yeah, so and for our listeners that don't know, that's how Don and I got to meet. That's how this whole thing started. So yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet to see it no longer on the circuit, but we're hopeful that we can pick up another couple awards.
And when you watch that movie, stick around for the credits because What's the Scuttlebutt is listed by name under the special thanks part of the credits on that film too, which is cool. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Oh, one thing real quick, we talk about it once in a while, but I really want to get the word out because I had one of the German guys say to me, hey, I don't listen to your podcast because I don't have Facebook. We are not a Facebook podcast. We simply use Facebook to help get the word out. And I explained to him, and his son subscribed right there. He pulled out his phone. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Music, Apple Podcasts. We are basically anywhere fine podcasts can be found. And as we are notified, and I jokingly joked about on TikTok, we are currently number 75 in education in Sweden. So, but if people in Sweden can find us, you can find us too. So you don't, if you're not on Facebook, not a big deal. If you're a web-based guy and you want to download it directly to your computer, best place to go is WTSPWorldWar2.com. That's WTSPWWII.com. All the shows can be downloaded directly from our website. But to be honest with you, as a podcast listener myself, I find it's personally easier to find an app that you like on your phone. That way, when you're driving around in your car, you can connect it to your radio and listen.
I just listen to it on Spotify.
Yeah. So Spotify, if you're an iPhone user, it may be easier for you to use Apple Podcast, which is fine. If you're an Android user and you don't want to download Spotify, every Android device has Google Music Play. But the caveat with that, I do not know why, all these companies get the same file off my server. They're basically just pulling up the RSS feed off my server. It's all the same file, but for some reason, and I have not figured out, the annoying thing about Google Music is when you hit pause or stop and turn off your car and come back in, the stupid thing, and it's not just this podcast, it's all the podcasts on my network, they start over from the beginning. Why, I don't know. Spotify doesn't do that. Stitcher doesn't do that. So that may be enough reason why you should probably, if you're an Android user, just use Spotify. And because that's one of the bigger platforms anyhow. And but yep, that's going to wrap it up. You guys got anything else?
No, good to see you guys again.
Yeah, always good to be here.
We'll see you all next week.
This has
All right.
been a Digital 410 production.